Hi, I'm Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. The Bronx is home to the world's most famous sports franchise, the New York Yankees, the Bronx Zoo, and the Botanical Garden. But did you know that it was also home to one of the world's most famous writers, Edgar Allan Poe? Poe Cottage is one of our borough's true cultural treasures. Poe lived in his home in the last few years of his life, and he wrote some of his most famous works right here. For visitors and New Yorkers, adults and school children alike, Poe Cottage is a chance to go back in time and submerge themselves in the world of this literary master.
This beautiful cottage harkens back to simpler times, and when people walk through its doors, they're transported. And they come here for a variety of reasons. Sometimes Poe scholars have read his works but want to read them here in the place where the artist actually created them. Other times people come from around the world and they've read Edgar Allan Poe's works in their own language. This is a chance to get to know the artist, the man, more intimately. It's no wonder that it's one of the Bronx's most popular attractions, one of the city's most popular attractions. When you come here, you get to know Edgar Allan Poe, but you get to know the Bronx too.
Here lived the soul enchanted by melody of song. Here dwelt the spirit haunted by a demonic throng. Here sang the lips elated. Here grief and death were sated. Here loved and here unmated was he, so frail, so strong.
The Poe Cottage, we're very lucky that we have something like that because it's really the roots of where he was and where he did some of his best work, where he did Eulalie and Eulalume, and he wrote poems, and he was the happiest there.
There's several things that make Poe Cottage unique. First of all, it was originally built by the Valentine family, who owned a farm in this area in the early 19th century, and they needed places, simple places, to house their farmhands, and they built several small cottages on the hill overlooking what is today Fordham Road. Of all of those cottages, the only one that survives is Poe Cottage, simply because Edgar Allan Poe lived here. Most preserved historic houses are the houses of the wealthy, of the rich, the grandeur and the beautiful furniture and all of that. This is the house of what a poor man would live in at that time in the 1840s. And indeed, Edgar Allan Poe was very, very poor. Poe came to the tiny village of Fordham was because his wife had a severe case of tuberculosis. He loved her dearly. He married her, she was very young, she was his cousin. And along with his mother-in-law, who was also his aunt, they came up to this area of Fordham in order to try, in a vain attempt, to use the fresh air of the rural area of Fordham to try to cure Virginia Poe, his wife, of tuberculosis.
It was his saddest point. His wife was dying. And he was poverty-struck. He could have made her life easier. He didn't have the means to do it. And he stood guard over her day and night. And he didn't want to lose her. And anyone who's had anyone they love die, you know what a traumatic time it is. But he was afraid to go too far because of, she needed him.
It didn't succeed. They came in the middle of 1846. In January of 1847, unfortunately, she died of tuberculosis.
All who have had opportunities for observation in the matter have noticed her husband's tender devotion to her during her prolonged illnesses. Here, he watched her failing breath and loneliness and privation through many solitary moons, until, on a desolate, dreary day of the ensuing winter, he saw her remains borne from beneath its lowly roof to a neighboring cemetery. Sarah Helen Whitman.
The cottage itself, the first thing that people notice when they come in is how small it is. The rooms are tiny, or to use a more euphemistic expression, intimate. The roof is very, very low. One of the reasons for that is to save wood and anything needed in order to produce heat, since a low ceiling would tend to trap the heat closer to the person. There is a kitchen, which in Poe's day, the fireplace provided the cooking facilities. There's this small parlor or drawing room or living room in which there's some very simple, modest furniture, a place where Poe had his books. Well, we do know that the bed that Virginia passed away in is still in the cottage today, and there is a rocking chair that belonged to Edgar Allan Poe. We also believe that there's a gilt-edged mirror that is part of the original Poe Cottage. All of the other furniture and furnishings were actually donated from elsewhere, but they fit the description of the furnishings of the cottage that were described by people who visited Poe when he lived here. Edgar Allan Poe rented this cottage from the Valentine family for $100 a year. Fordham was a fairly new suburban village. It was created basically by the existence of the New York and Harlem River Railroad, which is today the Harlem Division of Metro-North. The very first station they ever built on the mainland, coming up from Manhattan, was at this place called Fordham. And they named it Fordham after an old colonial manor of that same name. There was nothing here.
At the time Poe lived here, in the later years of the 1840s, this was a very different place. It was not urban at all. It was really scattered farmsteads. Very few places had been landfilled and smoothed out. When you move up the hill toward Grand Concourse to the west, there were gullies, and basically it was suitable for pastoral purposes only.
During Mr. Poe's residence at Fordham, a walk to High Bridge was one of his favorite and habitual recreations. The winding river and the high rocky shores at the western extremity of the bridge are seen to great advantage from this lofty avenue. In the last melancholy years of his life, the lonesome latter years, Poe was accustomed to walk there at all times of the day and night. Often pacing the then solitary pathway for hours without meeting a human being. Sarah Helen Whitman.
When Poe came to the Bronx, it wasn't the Bronx yet, it was still Westchester County. It hadn't been incorporated into New York City. And this institution had just begun. St. John's College was brand new in 1841. John Hughes, the soon-to-become Archbishop, was attempting to train priests to minister to the huge throngs of Irish immigrants that were entering New York. They arrived in 1846, approximately the same time Poe arrived in his new house here just off campus. And as a result, the individuals that Poe came to visit here would have been the first generation, literally the first 3 years of Jesuits who were starting to learn the ropes of this new neighborhood and attempting to run a college on the property.
Poe was known to them, and especially after Virginia Poe died, he was in a fit of melancholy, and he would amble over to the college, and they gave him the privileges of the library.
Poe, being somewhat educated, he quickly made friends with the Jesuit fathers here. Father Dessay's impression was that he was very much a gentleman, that he did not see this dissipated person that, Poe's reputation turned into many years later. They found him to be very literate, very scholarly. They enjoyed speaking French with him. And Poe, in return, one of my favorite comments, he wrote that he enjoyed visiting Fordham because they enjoyed smoking, drinking, and playing cards, and they never discussed religion. So that kind of gives you an idea of what his experience was here, which sounds somewhat positive. Sometime in the 1930s, they discovered a painting in Baltimore. I'm not clear who the artist is, but the painting shows what we believe is the Bronx River near what is now the Botanical Gardens. That property at the time was owned by the university, and it was called the Old Swimming Hole. And in this particular painting, there are three figures. One is a man with a mustache, the other is a young lady, the other is an older lady. And the general consensus is this is Edgar Allan Poe, his wife Virginia, and his mother-in-law, Mrs. Clem. This is nice evidence of his visits to Fordham. It seems like it was a pleasant and healthy atmosphere for him. Another item that we discovered just a few years ago when we were transcribing some of our old parish registers, one of my students was transcribing the 1844 and 1898 baptisms, and he brought it in my office. He says, look here, and there we see Edgar Allan Poe was sponsored to a baptism in January of 1848.
Quite a lot of Poe's writings contain references to places in the Bronx. One of the stories that he wrote while he was living at the cottage is called Landor's Cottage, in which he roams through the fields and comes to a cottage, and he describes the cottage that he sees there.
In fact, nothing could well be more simple, more utterly unpretending than this cottage. Its marvelous effect lay altogether in its artistic arrangement as a picture. I could have fancied while I looked at it that some eminent landscape painter had built it with his brush.
In addition to that, there is another story called The Domain of Arnhem, in which the narrator paddles a canoe through a gorge with very, very high rocks on either side. And of course, Poe's imagination makes those rocks bigger than they actually are. But that is the gorge of the Bronx River that is, you find today in the Botanical Garden.
A little to the east of the cottage rises a ledge of rocky ground, partly covered with pines and cedars, commanding a fine view of the surrounding country and of the picturesque College of St. John's. This rocky ledge was also one of the poet's favorite resorts. Here, through long summer days and through solitary, starlit nights, he loved to sit, dreaming his gorgeous waking dreams or pondering the deep problems of the universe.
Indeed, there is another poem that he wrote called Ulalume.
The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they were crisped and sere. The leaves, they were withering and sere. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year.
To the west, on a hill where Sedgwick Avenue is today, was the Fordham Manor Dutch Reformed Church, where Virginia was originally buried.
Many times, after the death of his beloved wife, was he found at the dead hour of a winter night, sitting beside her tomb, almost frozen in the snow, where he'd wandered from his bed, weeping and wailing. Charles Chauncey Burr.
So Poe actually did use his surroundings in his writings while he was living in the cottage. And of course, there is the bells.
Keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells.
The true spirit of Poe still lives on here at Fordham University because we have that bell that inspired him to write one of his most famous poems, The Bells. Here we have the bell that is now known as Old Edgar Allan. That name was coined by the class of 1939 when they put the plaque on the church commemorating that this bell was the bell that Edgar Allan Poe had heard when he was on campus. If you look closely, you can see that the date on the bell is 1840. That's followed by St. John's College, which was the original name of Fordham University. Fordham, the village, Westchester, New York.
Here through this lowly portal, made sacred by his name, unheralded, immortal, the mortal went and came, and fate that then denied him, and envy that decried him, and malice that belied him, have cenotaphed his fame.
The new Poe Park Visitor Center will serve the community as a venue where educational programming could be done, and it can also serve the community where events can be held as well. The center was designed by Toshiko Mori Architects. It was inspired by one of Edgar Allan Poe's most famous works, The Raven. And as you notice, the roof of the center actually slopes down to represent the raven's wings extended.
It's part of our heritage. It should be the major tourist attraction in the Bronx.
We are proud that the Bronx is a part of Poe's personal history, and that generations to come will have access to this wonderful landmark.